I'm 6 generations into the farming. 1826 is when my first family settled in this part of the world, just about 2 miles away from here. There's been farming in my family for that many generations. We live in the house that my grandfather and grandmother lived in and my dad was born in. Went away to college with no expectations actually to come back to the farm. I was going to move on and got a biological science degree and was really, hoping to head out west, head to Alaska, head somewhere. When my mom and dad moved off the farm, my wife and I moved here with our 2 children back in 1994. To actually make the decision to be back here on the farm back in the early 80s, it still wasn't really something I was aspiring to do. It kept me busy, kept some money in the bank. I worked a lot of odd jobs besides helping my dad and my brother on the farm. I was still looking for that outside job in my field, in my biology field. And I actually had just gotten an offer to work at the St. John's Hospital in Springfield in their lab. And at the same time frame, my dad decided to retire. His health wasn't great, and my brother and my dad decided to offer to bring me into the operation. So I tried to weigh, from the standpoint of agriculture, try to weigh, what that opportunity meant. Could I make a living? That was an unknown. Could I raise my family here? Do I want to raise? I'd love to have raised my family here. I mean, being out in the country, being in my community of Mount Pulaski, which I love, those are big parts and why I looked at being here. My future wife was going to school at University of Illinois, so it kept me close to her, and it gave us the opportunity then to start our life together once we got married. But you look at, I've indicated before that at 26, you're not probably asking all the questions that I'd be asking today about life and finances. Finances weren't key to my decision-making process. Farming wasn't wonderful, and 80s were very, very tough. So it wasn't about the finances, it was more about, lifestyle, where we were going to live, and actually the work. I mean, I'd worked on the farm my whole life. I knew the work. I enjoyed the hard work and the planting and harvesting. So I think more at that time I was looking at, would I enjoy what I was doing? And would I enjoy raising my family here? And I guess that's probably a lot of the drivers behind the decision I made. Chores that I had growing up probably wouldn't cut it with the safety protocol of today at all. I grew up probably on the end of the era a little bit of where children, and if you're in a farm family, you were expected to be part of the operation at a very early age. So, early on probably collecting eggs, feeding the hogs, feeding the cattle. You'd hop in a pickup truck and go pick up your dad at a field somewhere when you're probably 6 or 7. We learned pretty early how to drive a clutch, or you drive a tractor to the field. And probably when I got into that 9, 10 area, you were actually doing a lot of chores out in the field. You'd cut hay, you'd help bale the hay, you'd help bale straw. We walked a lot of beans in our day. I mean, that went up in the high school days and stuff. You'd basically get, a lot of the kids from town would always come up, and those would be their summer jobs, as walking beans. I was probably one of the crew early on, but when you get into high school, then you become the crew chief, and you'd have 6 or 7 kids out, and back then the chemicals weren't there. You cultivated the corn mechanically, but you also depended on the crews to come out and walk beans with hose and hooks and cut the weeds out of the field. Later on, when I was coming home from college during the summers and stuff, the 70s is when a lot of people who always used to have livestock and fences up and pastures for their livestock, we had pretty good prices for corn and soybeans. And what happened was then, all the people like my father and all of them who had worked so hard on all their lives saw the opportunity to actually make some money. So they got rid of their pastures, got rid of the alfalfa, and I tore down, every summer I was tearing down barbed wire fences. I remember that. I'd be somewhere in the back 40 or a couple miles from home and taking all the fence off, rolling it all up, taking the posts out of the ground. So that's what we did at that time frame. And then, you always did a lot of the field work during the fall. You help harvest. I remember my dad got hurt when I was a senior in high school, and I was basically got out of school, which amazes me today that they let that happen. And I think the teachers were fine with it, and they got me through school. But I came and helped with the harvest all fall and took over from my dad when I was a senior in high school. So you're expected to do a lot in those days, and the kids today, I don't think we want to put them in that position necessarily, but back then that was expected.
We are flying over the central farming region of the United States, a vast, rich area in the middle of the North American continent, an area which each year produces enormous harvests of food, yet whose agricultural and industrial resources are still being developed and whose full potential has yet to be realized. What makes the central farming region so important to our nation and to the world? Why is it foremost among the great agricultural areas of the world? What is life like for the farmers who live and work here? And what are some of their problems?
How have things changed since, the 70s and 80s? We were a lot more diversified. I would think back in that time frame before we became strictly, monoculture with corn and soybeans and a little bit of wheat. Back then you had pasture, you had everybody had animals. And you had alfalfa, you had oats.
As the growing number of abandoned farmhouses in the Midwest tells us, the large-scale use of machinery for farming has created some problems and brought about some changes in the central farming region.
The farms were much smaller. The average farm was probably about 300 or 400 acres, and it was all within a mile of home. And in agriculture then, you probably had, on a section of land, which is 640 acres, you probably had 4 or 5 farms. Today, the average size of a farm in central Illinois is probably 2,000 acres. You may have sections of land that have no farmsteads on them anymore. I would say that the number of farm operations have probably been cut since in the last 40 years, over half. And that land then just goes to an existing farmer, someone else. We travel a lot more than what we used to. We never used to travel, like I say, it used to be a mile within home. I think we're going to try and switch the big combine this afternoon over to corn. Yeah. So I can go over or you can do what you can, and then I'll show you what needs to be done to switch from soybeans to corn on like 4 or 5 of the transitions. You always could have your house in sight, and now we travel 30 to 40 miles, and for some people that's nothing. They'll travel 100 miles to go farm larger pieces of ground. Financially, corn, when I first started, we had some really rough years in the 80s, but I did $1.60, $1.70 a bushel. Soybeans about $4 or $5. This last year we were selling corn for $6 and beans for $15 to $16. And our yields are so much better than what they used to be. When I first started, yields were probably 55 bushel beans and 150 bushel corn. And now regularly we're expecting 250 bushel corn and 80 bushel soybeans. So economically, the amount of money coming and flowing through the operation is much more. On the other hand, our expenses are out of sight. And like with everybody who either runs a business or has a family, know that expenses have just gotten really out of hand, and there's really nothing you can do about it. It's just as hard to make a living today as it was back then. It's a different financial dynamic with the amount of money that flows through. Our corn isn't doing as well as we'd like over this part of the countryside. Things are much more, analyzing our business happens now on a monthly, yearly basis. They didn't have as much rain. Back then, things didn't change a lot. You could do the same thing for 3, 4, 5 years, and it wasn't changing. Now it's so dynamic that things change very quickly. First, livestock was very time-consuming, very labor-intensive. Many people, you couldn't leave the farm because you had to take care of the livestock every day. And I think that financially, that's the way it had always been. You kind of provided your family with everything that you raised, and if you had any excess, I mean, it went to market. I think what happened in the early 70s, if my memory serves me right, there was a pretty heavy frost that killed a lot of the crop. And then there were some embargoes later on in the mid-70s that enabled prices to go way above what they normally had been for corn and soybeans and wheat. So once those prices got elevated, it was kind of like a gold mine for a lot of these farmers who had worked their whole lives 7 days a week, 12-hour days, and not making a lot of money. Happy, but I don't think making a lot of money. So when those prices changed, you had this land available. Maybe you used to have 70% of your land in cash crop. So now there was that opportunity to put it all in a cash crop, the other 30%, and actually make a lot of money because price got so high. Now, of course, it's like everything else, supply and demand. Those prices didn't last. But once you took the land out and put it into production and took it out of pasture, people got rid of their livestock. There was no going back for them. So it just really changed the whole dynamic, how things work. And then gradually, I think that the organizations, the corn organizations, the soybean organizations, the businesses, the seed companies, all got in the promotion of trying to make the Midwest, the provider to the world of corn and soybeans, and they developed the marketing and developed the ability for us to move grain all around the world. And so we became kind of a breadbasket to the world. And once that happened, we never looked back. And it is simpler. I mean, one thing about our life now, to just raise corn and soybeans, and there's a pattern there, and you have time off. I mean, a lot of people want to go do other things, be like the rest of society and have vacations and go places. And I think that allowed people to live more of a normal life compared to working 7 days a week and 12-hour days.
On a section of land, 640 acres, where once there were 4 farms and 4 different families, there's now only 1 farm. And that 1 farm, if it is well run with the help of machines, produces much more than all 4 used to, with fewer hands to do the work.
What's happened in today's world from the standpoint of larger farms getting bigger and bigger, and maybe smaller operations or the average size operations, the competitive nature of what that looks like today, especially in central Illinois. This part of the world probably is the epicenter. While it's happening everywhere, central Illinois has taken on certain aspects of being very competitive. And what's happened is it used to be that when you farm for someone, and this is when I started back in the 80s, it was a 50-50 crop share lease. So you'd have the landowner, whatever land you didn't own, you'd rent from a landowner, and you would pay. You would share in the expenses and in the revenue 50-50. So they had a skin in the game, so to speak, and there wasn't a lot of competition of trying to take land either away from someone you already farmed. It was just a natural progression of things. If a neighbor gave up their farm, that landowner might come to you and ask you to farm his farm. And we weren't in competition with one another quite as much. Along with better financial or the ability to make more money in the farm, it got a little bit more competitive, and cash rents came into being in the 80s and 90s, and now it's pretty much prevalent today. if you don't own your own ground, you're basically cash renting now. So the difference in that is that I'm paying the landowner a certain amount of money up front, and then I take on all the expenses, but I get all the revenue. So all of the capital basically is generated by the operator. But what happens now is there are operators they have people that just go around to the bank managers or to the landowners and solicit them to farm their ground, whether an operator's giving it up or not. So there's a lot of operators who, and it used to be to where the only way you would get out of business is you'd retire. Now there's a lot of farms that are taken away from people, and then now their size, they can't keep operating. So that's happened a lot. The sad thing about that is we start doubting our neighbors, and we don't trust people like we used to. You wonder why they're driving by your house or driving by your farm, or why they're talking to your landlord. So it's taken away one of those aspects of why we all loved farming, is that you always trusted people that'd be there to support you. Now you're always afraid that they're there to take your land away from you. So from that aspect, it's really changed. The large farms tend to get larger, especially with absentee landowners. Landowners who don't live here, and really the only thing they worry about is the amount of money that you're willing to pay them. So it's a challenge for a lot of young farmers, more so than for me, because I'm established, and I'm at that point in time where it doesn't make any difference to me. But my son and other young farmers like him are always constantly trying to, make their farm better, make it grow. And it's not easy for them to do that in today's atmosphere. For young people, I think it's quite the challenge. If you're not from the community or from the area or had an ag background, then it's really tough. Definitely not easy. Say you grew up in the city and wanted to come out and start farming, that's almost impossible. A lot of young people have grown up within the community and worked all their lives in agriculture and have found the right niche for them to get involved and have an opportunity later in life. He or she, if they're wanting to get into the ag world or farming end of it, great opportunities in agribusiness. There's a lot of our kids who are graduating high school. We have an excellent Future Farmers of America program. They go on to college and they find there's opportunities there in the ag business world. And so many of the young people I see graduate are just flowing into that, and it's been a great opportunity for them, and really very good jobs. To actually get an ag production, that's where it's tough if you're not born into it, but there are opportunities there that I've seen that young men or women will get on with a current operation and be able to build their own business after maybe working there, and then either taking over for that operator who had no one else in their family, or the opportunity comes up to rent 500 acres and they share equipment with who they're working for. So the opportunity is there, a little bit more difficult because the capital needs are so great. A lot of times, like in my instance with my son who's come back in, we serve as that capital resource until Chris can get his feet up on the ground, and we remain in the business and share equipment and do things while that person, without that opportunity, it's a little bit more difficult possibly. But you can trade labor, you can be creative and try and come up with that right scenario where, you can work your way into that business. It can be overwhelming, and a few bad moves, and it can end your business pretty quick. And it didn't used to be that way. You had more latitude, you had a little bit more ability to where you had a couple bad years, you still could hang in there. Today's world, it's and I think we're going to see that in the next 3 to 4 years. I think our prices aren't going to rebound to where they were, and then expenses aren't going to come down. And I think in this part of the world, Central Illinois, we're going to see a shakeout a little bit, and so it's going to be real interesting to those who can adapt and have built up enough capital to be able to stay in the game, and those who are overextended and one bad year could end their business. Where's farming going to be in 10 or 15 years? And if you're talking specifically about me, I'm not probably, I'm 67. I'm in relatively pretty good health. My hope is I can still work and help my son on the farm. A lot of farmers continue to work. They never truly retire because they love the life. They're proud of, what they've not only done in the past, but proud of what they're doing in the future. So my hope is that I'm still here for another 10 or 15 years, able to physically work and be part of the system, and mentally, of a capacity to where I know exactly what I'm doing and able to help my son make good decisions. Where my son's going to be, Christopher's 32. There's a lot of young people in their 30s, late 20s, 30s that are, the opportunity's there for them to come in because my generation is stepping out. The opportunities are different for them. We came in really tough times in the 80s. Ag still wasn't as sexy, supposedly, as what it is now. The opportunity to make money wasn't huge. You had lower expectations. So we were able to buy farmland really cheap. That's Cheryl and I bought my first piece of farmland when I was in college. We were able to buy property through our whole career. The properties increased in value, so that's a big part of your portfolio, and it's enabled us to at least look pretty good on paper, but also have an income coming off that farm. So we have a good amount of acres that we own. For the young farmers, the capital needed to just get involved in the business, and then because the land values are so high, isn't enabling them to put money into land and then see that land appreciate in value, and that creates net worth for them. What a lot of their money goes into is their equipment and cash rents, and that's all stuff that doesn't build your net worth necessarily. It allows you to run a business year to year, but it doesn't build that net worth. So I'm a little bit more worried about not only Christopher, but even my daughter, who both my daughter and her husband have great jobs, but to build net worth the way my generation and maybe the generation before were able to do, you build up that net worth over generations. It's going to be much harder for them. And so I think Chris has started his own trucking business now. So he's not just looking at ag production, grain production as his only source of income. He started this business. Chris always had other businesses. He had the hay business, the straw business, the snowplow business. So that's what we required him to do to be able to get his feet wet. But I think for him, as he takes over the farm, now he has to look on a bigger scale and go, where else can I keep things moving, and where can I have income coming in year round? Rather than in ag production, you work 6 months, 7 months out of the year, and then you're not really creating wealth those 12 months. And I think some of our young people are going to have to look at those additional areas where they can create income to be able to allow them to farm. Farming is still going to be, in my opinion, it's always been, and I think it will continue to be, 2 really good years, 2 bad years, and 6 years of breaking even, mediocrity. And I think that trend will continue. There may be higher highs, but there might be lower lows. But you have to be able to take advantage of those really good years and create that ability to stay in the business over the long haul. For me as a farmer, it was a 40-year process. Most people can every year work for their salaries, put away and this and that. For me, I always had to keep reinvesting my money in new equipment or land or somewhere. And my goal was always, I never really had much cash on hand. My goal was at the end of 40 years, I'd build enough net worth to where I could retire and enjoy my life. So it's any business is like that, I think. When you run a business, it's long term. You stick a lot of money back in the business to keep it growing and keep it viable. Farming is a business to where 1 or 2 people within that operation wear all the hats. You don't have an IT department, you don't have an administrative department, you don't have, a lot of the resources in people and in knowledge that a lot of large businesses have. Farming, from the standpoint of sole operator or sole, person who takes care of, not only the physical work, the operations, they do all the financial work, If you do have people hired, you do all the human resource work. You basically take on every aspect of the business model that you're doing. Once you get large enough, there are some businesses that are able to hire that out, but typically today, most operations that are family-run operations is still within the family. I see that getting harder and harder, and that's one reason with our son that we remain vigilant in helping him in his financial and in his bookkeeping. But we see where for my generation, it started in the 80s, I could do it all. Fortunately, I had a wife who was an accountant and greatly added to that aspect of our operation in helping run numbers and helping with tax and everything. Our life is determined by the seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall. And it's not only the enjoyment of watching the change in the seasons, but also we're dependent on that from our way of life and our business. You're at the mercy of a rainstorm coming in the middle of summer to keep your crop going and to have the very best crop you can. I love the seasons. I love to see the changes. When you farm, you're in tune with everything that's going on. One thing I've always said is that if I could give my father anything when he was farming, it was the ability to predict a little bit better the weather, the rainstorms, the rain systems that are coming through. They've gotten so good with that today that, I mean, that's a huge aspect every day, every morning, every evening. I'm watching the weather to help me determine where I'm going to be in 10 days, 2 weeks. Sometimes the calendar tells you that you have to be planting or harvesting, but a lot of times the forecasts will allow me to plan and go, okay, it's going to have a warming trend. It's early April, but we can run because we're going to be able to get our crop germinated. Watching the weather is not only a hobby, it's become a passion for me and for a lot of farmers, I think. I see a lot of this generation, the young people coming in now, what they're doing is they're doing more management than more the operational end of stuff, because there's so many different facets of it now that it's just much more difficult than what it was back in my day. So you see a lot of the young people there. Some of them are still doing a lot of the operations, some of the operations, but more and more their job description is 70% management, 30% operations, where it used to be you were all the operations and all the management. And so it's changing a little bit. Do the people in America who aren't associated in agriculture, which is the general population, care about what's going on in the ag world and our viability? What I'd say is right now they do. But a lot of that's because of this nostalgia. And many of them still are only a generation or so removed from having a grandparent or having some family on the farm. So there's still that connection, I believe, that they understand it a little bit, but it's so nostalgic versus business-wise and do we provide food that they can live their lives without even, and without even thinking about it. So I think it's a generational thing. I think we still have that support and people care, how whether we're successful or not. I think they still, strategically, I think if you really looked at it, for America not to be producing our food and letting another country, strategically, it'd be the worst move we'd ever make. We found that out with computer chips and with other products that just China put out of business because they could produce it cheaper. And there's going to be constant competition with Brazil, Ukraine, places around the world that can produce just as well as we can and maybe produce it cheaper. But we need to maintain our ability to have our own food industry. And it just is, for our security, I think it's huge. I guess I'd love to get in a debate with people someday, and maybe they could educate me more. But that's how I see that. From the standpoint of always being supported, I think that as the generations move on and there's less connection, I think they're going to see us more of a bed and breakfast and a place to drive through and look at the dairy cows and isn't that cute and all this. I think they're going to lose more of a connection to where that support may not always be there the way it is today. But right now I think it's there. Hopefully we can maintain that and stay connected. Because of social network and all the information that's out there, it's much easier to stay connected. And then it all comes down to the message that you're sending, from farm ag country into the rest of the country and into the cities. Knowing where government stepped in back in the 30s and 40s when things were really, really tough. I'm just reading the book, The Grapes of Wrath again, and going back to those days. It's one of my favorite books, and reading about what the challenges they faced and how devastating it was. And it probably is, we all want to be independent. We all want to think that we don't need help. But I think in agriculture, there are times where there needs to be intervention. And I think at that period of time, agriculture made up such a large portion of America's wealth and providing food that it was necessary that you had to come in and prop up and support all these families and all this industry. It was huge. It's pretty hard to stand back and watch that happen to such a large number of people. Is what happened then still have an influence on what's happening today? Boy, it's hard to find any place that it doesn't have some type of government intervention in it. And I think it goes back to what we talked about before, is that I think the government has a role in helping put a floor underneath the industry so there isn't failures, but they can't prevent us from individuals from failing, or they can't prop it up so you're guaranteed a profit, because then the industry's not being true to itself. And I think you have to have the ability to find that equilibrium between income and expenses, and to be a true business. And so I think that influence is still there. I think we're constantly fighting how much influence they have and how much we should be independent on our own. The government has tended, they went back and forth on direct subsidies versus right now where they're at is they help subsidize the insurance industry, which I think probably is a good thing. Insurance, most everybody I know will take crop insurance, revenue insurance to help protect them from a terrible year. Agriculture, today's world, can be 1 or 2 bad years and you'll be out of business. And agriculture is a little bit different to where you can't transition farms from one person to the other very easily. I mean, Walmart can go out of business, or somebody can go out of business. Somebody will come in and take over for them. In the ag industry, I think you need stabilization. So I think that them helping subsidize the insurance market makes a lot of sense, rather than direct subsidies. What I'd like to do is see it somewhat limited. If they come in and never allow people to fail, what happens is you have the ability that people aren't doing a good job or skewing the market with higher cash rents, never have the opportunity to fail, then that system is always skewed to the higher end. So it doesn't let things find an equilibrium. And I think that's not a good thing. I think there has to be a point to where you find your price and you find where, we tend never to stop producing, and we don't do a very good job at supply and demand. So I think that's where the government has to be very careful, is they need to put a floor underneath things, but they shouldn't be a profit maker for our industry. They help in so many other ways. I like to see farmers as organizations put their own money in to develop markets overseas or develop new markets here at home. I don't think that's the role of the government. I think that should be the industry as a whole trying to make those things happen. whether we consider ourselves a part of the food chain and providing food and fuel and livestock feed to not only our country but the world, it's in the back of your mind always. And because I've been involved, I think about that. I think about how the system works and, you know, how important a cog we are. We're on the front end of things, but it's not forefront in your mind all the time. Your business is in the forefront. So the two things that I'd say for me is it's the lifestyle I lead and able to work hard and feel like I've accomplished something, you know, each and every day. And then it's the financial and the business aspect. I spend a lot of time in my office at the computer I run numbers constantly. And so that for me probably overwhelms anything else I think about. It's making sure I can pay the bills and make enough money to have raised my family and now for retirement. And but there's always that segment of you that is proud of what you do and understand that you're an integral part of the whole system and that it starts with you. So I think you've seen what makes a bad day on the farm for me. I used to have a lot more tolerance for breakdowns. You'd think a lot of times one tube will get clogged up, but not that many tubes will get clogged up. One of those days right now. Planting wheat is always a challenge because we're already busy in the middle of harvest. 80 acres. You take resources, labor, equipment, and get your wheat crop planted. You want to be very timely. You want to be around that October 1st date. You think you have everything set up, ready to run smoothly, and then that day we ran into some difficulties that were not anticipated and took us a while to figure out.
Why would they be clogged up?
While it wasn't complicated,
Hey, I'm clogged up.
every hour is an hour that you're falling behind.
I'd love to get one like good
I know.
big acre day in.
I hear you. Hopefully, because we have to transition to wheat, it takes away. So we get wheat done and then we all be able to hit corn.
Yeah.
The crew wasn't able to really figure out what was exactly going on. So it ended up taking us over half a day.
If I need kind of a long wire, see, just isn't flowing. And which one is it? It's clear down here. I want to say something, but you have to mic me. God dang it.
Then we ended up having 3 or 4 people work on the process, and then it kind of threw a wrench into the whole plan that day.
So this is one reason a lot of people don't plant wheat either. You're so busy. To devote somebody to do it, it's not easy to do.
Sometimes my son and I don't always agree on what we ought to be doing on a day, and we may argue a little bit, and if we don't come to terms with one another and we're a little bit upset, that's a bad day. I don't like days like that. I like us that we're all on the same page and heading down the same path. I'm typically pretty easygoing and kind of go with the flow. And I tell you where it's happened, when you transition from who makes decisions and who listens and says, okay, that's what we're going to do. Chris and I had a couple years where I was trying to let him make the decisions because I want him to make the decisions. And maybe I didn't necessarily agree with him, and I'd try to intervene a little bit and go, well, what about doing this? And I discovered that there can only be one boss final. There's only one person who can make a final decision. And I've learned that my place now is in advisement. And if he wants to know what I think, but then he makes the decision to go. And I've learned that I go, tell me what I'm supposed to be doing today. And if he asks me some questions, I gave him some feedback, I'll stand there until he tells me what he wants me to do. And things have been much better once I learned where I was in my career. What was the reasoning for our Economic Development and Planning Board to head down the path of trying to bring the market to the hill into our community? And what had happened in 2016, we had lost our last grocery store. Mount Placid used to have 4 grocery stores back in the day. Like a lot of other small communities, you were self-contained. You had everything you needed within your community. And then that ended in the 60s and 70s. And we understood that for our community to try and maintain, it's either maintain or grow, we needed to have the ability to have at least the basic grocery staples. And once we decided that, then we also wanted to bring the more fresh local foods in. So I got involved in this back in about 2015. And it was created from when we had a group of people who were raising questions about the new wind farm that was coming into our part of the world and going to be putting up towers around our farms and around our countryside. We ended up negotiating with them for economic development money and began using some of those monies to the betterment, long-term development of economic development in our town. We knew that we wanted to try and get a grocery store back in to the community, but a big piece of that was developing a market for local produce, meats, eggs, dairy, vegetables, nuts, grains. How do we develop that market to where the market on the hill initially was helping move those products through the store and help our local economy, because all that money stays there. So when you ask the question, why do we move down this path, it's health, it's economic development. We just circle that money around and around within the community. Plus then we're producing locally fresh foods that to me are much better to eat. And they're one day away from being processed or picked, and they're on your table the next day. So we got the Market on the Hill open in 2020, and a piece of that puzzle was also developing a local food processing center to where we start creating more markets for our local producers. And our local producers we consider Central Illinois.
So all this is cabbage. We have about 15 acres here.
You know, we're trying to deal in the Peoria to Bloomington, Decatur to Springfield area. You want just about Mount Pulaski. And what we want to do is start trying to become a distributor into the institutional type buyers. So the hospitals, the nursing homes, the schools. And so our idea was we become the marketer, we become the distributor.
5 pounds of jalapenos.
You do what you do best, and that's raise a product, raise what you want to raise, be a farmer. That's why a lot of people got into it. We'll buy your product, and then we'll take it from there and get it into the institutions. Why now? You know, that's probably the question. Why now versus 10 years ago? I think the emphasis on eating good food. I'm different than I used to be 10 years ago. I love going and finding good food and well-prepared food and unique foods, not just what we used to eat as a kid, you know, pot roast on Sundays, Spanish rice on Tuesdays, you know, whatever it may be, it was pretty predictable. And I think generational society, the young people want to experience good food. It's entertainment. So that's one of my first things. And what fits right into that model then is locally produced foods that are healthy. And I think people are looking, that's the other piece of it, are really looking at healthy foods. And if you get down to like the economic boards and the people who really are looking at, you know, trying to preserve the way of life in our area, it's just a no-brainer on the economics because all the money stays in-house and it doesn't get shipped to California or to Brazil or to Mexico. And one other aspect I think of, not everybody thinks about it, but when COVID hit, we found out that our system of transportation and sourcing foods and this and that isn't perfect and is vulnerable. If we can produce more local foods and have them just a few miles away, I think it's a security issue for us. And I know we tend not to think about that, But in the long run, if something really did happen, and like COVID and the like, there's a little bit more security knowing that your food is coming from a local source. I was in the middle of being on the Illinois Corn Marketing Board, which helped fund a lot of the ethanol plants, and kind of right in the middle of when ethanol really started taking off. So what's happened there is that it created a whole new market for the corn product, and the byproduct, which was DDGs, which is the solids that came out of the process, turned into a wonderful feed additive and feed for livestock. And what it did, it created a whole new market. I can't give you the number, but I'm going to say it created a market for, initially 5 to 6 billion bushels of corn. So what happened is it ratcheted up. We were using much more corn. And there, for a while, for about 10 or 15 years, it let us increase the profitability of our corn as we increase demand. We've leveled off some now because now corn yields are so much better, our acres are higher, so we reacted to that increased demand, and now we've leveled off again. So what you're always looking for is that next demand spike to create products that you can now use more corn. But ethanol for about, like I say, 10 to 15, 20-year period really enabled a more profitable business with corn growers. Was it subsidized by the government? Yes. And that's where we get back to one of the original questions. Where does government have a place? Is it direct subsidies? Is it helping subsidize and allow us to use a product that maybe wasn't originally on the radar screen? And that's where the 15%, 10% ethanol in the gasoline requirement from the federal government made all the difference. They helped create that market. Good, bad, I guess I'm still going to land on the good side. I think ethanol is good for in the environment as a whole. There's no doubt. It's created a whole new industry for the Midwest. Would I like to see government gradually then? I always like to see, I don't see mine's government get involved, is if there's a sunset to where they can get out and we can survive on our own. We still need the government involved to help mandate ethanol use. But it seems like ethanol is maybe getting a little bit more revived here with our climate change, and that ethanol maybe has more of a role in helping solve that. So that's a good thing that industry is there and doesn't have to be created. If electric vehicles become the norm, and it sure seems like the push is to get it there, even though they're going through their growing pains, that will be worked out sooner or later, I think, that ethanol the demand for ethanol will probably fall off to a certain extent. So there's no doubt. I think that's a possibility. That's why, a new ethanol plant was built specifically for jet fuel in Iowa recently. So I think there is a lot of concern from that standpoint. The little bit I'm still involved, I think there is concern there, and I think they're all trying to figure it out right now. Wow. A favorite memory. It would take volumes to actually talk about all the wonderful memories. I guess one of my favorite memories in being on the farm would be when our parents were still alive, both Cheryl's and mine, our grandparents. Many of our grandparents were still alive. And we were living here, and everybody would come home for Thanksgiving or a holiday, and we'd have 3 tables set up. We'd have 35 people here, and we had family come from Colorado or from South Dakota, or they all came home, and we were all here together. And you talk about the memories, and you talk about growing up, and you talk about the good old days, I guess. And I guess that would be one of my favorite. I always loved having our holidays here, but especially Thanksgiving, and having everybody come back and be together again, and think about all those who came before us and enjoyed those same times, and how fortunate we were to have that heritage and those memories to be able to relive and share together. Society has an idealistic view of what we do. There's just no doubt about it. But so do we. I mean, that's one reason we're here. One of my favorite things every day, I watch the sun come up and I watch the sun go down. And I love that part of who I am and where I'm at. I love being able to go out on a walk in the morning, have the dogs next to me, Cheryl and I walk. I mean, all those things, we cherish those idealistic values of being here. One of those too is because our families have been here for so long. You have a sense of being here, and you have a sense of them still surrounding you, and that you're carrying on those traditions. But then there's the realism of it, of back in the office and all the hard work and how things have changed from the standpoint of, it was like everything, everybody's business, everybody's life has changed a great deal. It's a lot faster, moves a lot quicker, changes happen constantly now, and that didn't used to happen back when I first started. It was a little bit more simplistic and not quite as financially challenging as what it is today. So, but that's one reason I think I'm here, and most of the people I know are still farming in here, is a lot of kids moved on because they didn't have that passion for their community and for the roots they had. That's a huge part of who I am. And so it definitely was a huge aspect of why I'm here. The people who settled here and drove their stake in the ground are the ones who set me up to do what I've done today. And each generation basically gave me an opportunity somewhere, or helped me change my life, but it gave me the passion for my community and for what I do, and I love that about them, because I'd hate to live my life without passion and about duty and commitment, and they gave me that. So what makes a good day on the farm? You know, there's not a lot of routine on the farm, even today. So it's hard to say, here's the one day that's like, our best day, because it's like everything else. I guess what makes a good day on the farm is when your family's all happy and healthy, and your grandkids had a good day at school when they call you now. A harvest day is a good day when all the machinery runs correctly, and everything goes according to plan, which is not always the case. And so when it goes according to plan, you get to the end of the day, you're tired, but you had a really productive day and safe day. And your son tells you how much he enjoys farming. And a good day is when everybody's safe, I guess, and you're productive, and you got to watch the sun go up and the sun go down, and you got to watch some geese fly over and maybe a couple deer out in the field, and you go, life's pretty good.